Hello, Dog Nation. It's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Getting ready for Missouri on Saturday. Looking forward to that. Fun show planned today. Former Georgia quarterback David Greene is going to be here. He'll tell you about a big autograph signing he's going to be a part of this Saturday in Athens. We'll also have my partner from AT&T SEC Country Live, Mike Johnson, on today's program. We're going to talk about some of what's been said about Kirby Smart this week and what's been said by Kirby Smart, blocking out those distractions as Georgia makes a move towards potentially a championship this season. I'll also start with a little thoughts about Jake Fromm as well. It is all on the way as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a way to look at Jake Fromm's season, his freshman year at Georgia, that would almost make it seem like Fromm is not having that good of a year. In fact, there are a couple stats that kind of float out there on the internet that are just sort of paint a downright unflattering picture. For instance, Fromm just 13th in the SEC in passing yards per game. From that standpoint, it sounds like Fromm is one of the worst quarterbacks in the entire league. Furthermore, Georgia just 93rd in the country in total passing yards this season, or I should say Fromm himself, just 93rd in the country in total passing yards this season. That makes it sound like Fromm is one of the worst quarterbacks in the entire country, that Georgia is this limited offense that's only one-dimensional and can only rely on its running game, and if you give the ball to Jake Fromm and the game on the line, he's probably going to lead to a disappointment. I wanted to start the show by saying today that if all you do is fixate on numbers like that when it comes to Jake Fromm, I think you miss overall the big picture of what Fromm's actually doing. Because I think when it's all said and done, including right now, by the way, I think that Jake Fromm's having a much better season at Georgia than he's probably getting credit for. And the reason why he's not getting credit for it is because I don't think some people have noticed this. So I want to see if I can change that here today. And I want to throw this full-screen graphic up on the screen. Because while you may look at the overall total, passing yards for Fromm and some of that kind of stuff, it's unflattering. But if you really whittle it down to his yards per attempt, and the reason why we talk about yards per attempt here on DawgNation Daily is because yards per attempt sort of tell the story of how efficient a quarterback is, combined with how explosive he is. The number of passing yards you get divided by the number of times you've dropped back to throw. And every time that Fromm this season has dropped back to throw, Georgia has gained an average of 8.8 yards on those attempts. That's a pretty good number here. It would make him fourth best in the SEC when it comes to yards per attempt, and it's a figure good enough for 19th best in the country. He is also, by the way, at 8.8 for the season, 2.2 yards ahead of Jacob Eason from last year. And I don't say that to disparage Jacob Eason. I say that just to sort of point out that Fromm is having, based on a pretty important metric, a much better freshman season than Jacob Eason had a year ago. And if you look at the true, number that I think matters more than any other, that yards per attempt metric, he's among the SEC's best passers and among the best in the country when it comes to that as well. But the news actually gets better for Jake Fromm as well, because the 8.8 yards per attempt, average passing yards divided by total attempts on the season, it actually gets much better when you get to SEC games, because in the 3 SEC games that Jake Fromm has played thus far this season, he's actually averaging 10.2 yards per attempt. Now, I don't think that's an insignificant or sort of arbitrary designation either, because the 3 SEC games that Fromm has played have all come here recently. The earlier non-conference games all happened in the early parts of the month of September when Fromm was continuing to kind of make himself comfortable in a passing offense, make himself comfortable at the quarterback level. But here for the last 3 weeks, as defenses have theoretically gotten better against SEC foes, Fromm's performance has also gotten better as well. And just as a little thought bubble here, if Jake Fromm could sort of maintain this performance the rest of the season, 10.2 yards per attempt, he would actually be first in the SEC in that category, and he'd be the 5th best quarterback in the country at that metric. And you can go read any of these stats blogs, any of these sort of math nerds, numbers guys, whatever you want to call them. They'll all tell you when it's time to look at a quarterback and evaluate a quarterback, yards per attempt is probably the way to go, and yards per attempt tell a story of Jake Fromm having a much better season than a lot of people are giving him credit for. But that probably leads to a question on the part of many Georgia fans. Well, if Jake Fromm is having a better year than we think, than some think, if he is more efficient, more explosive than some people have noticed, why isn't the passing game more a part of the Georgia offense? Because the one thing that the story is not told by the numbers that I just gave you is that Fromm is putting up relatively efficient numbers in limited numbers of time to throw the football. Has not thrown the ball a lot in the games that really mattered, especially the SEC games as of late. When is the passing game going to become more a part of Georgia's offense? Well, Kirby Smart has talked about that a few times here over the course of the last couple days, including yesterday when he met with the media, and he gave a pretty candid answer about exactly what it's going to take for the passing game to develop and grow and become a bigger part of the repertoire at Jim Chaney's disposal. Here's Kirby Smart.
I don't think that you do that in games. I think that during the game, you got to do what you got to do to win. You got to take what the defense gives you, and you got to take whatever advantages you get. I think you develop that through practices, and we've tried to do that the last several weeks. We want to grow the passing game. We want to get all the quarterbacks we got comfortable throwing it, receivers comfortable catching it, and we certainly got to improve our pass defense so our guys get to go against it. So that's a practice issue more than a game issue.
So I think that's a pretty interesting statement from Kirby Smart on Jake Fromm, and here's kind of what it leads me to say. If Fromm is being efficient in games right now, which he probably is, my guess is that he's also being efficient in practice as well. My guess is that Kirby Smart and Jim Chaney are seeing, and Jay Johnson, when he's watching the practice film and everything else, my guess is they are seeing what Fromm is capable of doing. They are seeing what he has at his disposal. And my guess is these Georgia coaches have probably also noticed that the stats for Fromm are probably a little better when you look deeper than they may appear to be at first glance. I actually think the Georgia quarterback situation is probably pretty good at the moment, and I think it's probably better than a lot of people realize. And when you get to these key games coming up against Florida in a couple of weeks, against Auburn in the month of November, if you want to look ahead to the possibility of an SEC championship game there as well. As people in our comment section have been saying over and over again, when you play in Auburn, or if you were to play in Alabama, probably a Florida too, Georgia may have to throw the ball more to win those games. I think the people who've said that here in our comment section on DawgNation Daily, I think they're probably right about that. But what these numbers, the ones that I just shared with you, I think indicate is that when Fromm is asked to throw more, he's going to be more than equal to that challenge. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It is good to have you with us. So glad whether you're watching us on Facebook Live right now. We're on every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page. You can also hear our show on the radio every day on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rep. We're on there at noon. And in podcast form, iTunes, SoundCloud. We post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. If you don't get a chance to have your comment responded to here live on the air, if you're watching us on video, you can also see those comments responded to right there in the comment section when we post the show at DawgNation.com. I always love hearing from you on that. Also love doing our Gator Hater Countdown, and the biggest challenge for us when we do the Gator Hater Countdown is actually keeping the number of days straight. But 17 days from right now, Georgia will play in Jacksonville, and I believe that if Jake Fromm's called upon that day to have a big game, my guess is that Fromm's going to be able to do that, and I think Georgia gets that win over Florida and takes a step towards owning the East here in 2017. We are really excited about, by the way, being in Jacksonville. We're doing a special DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville that day. Now, this is a little different than what we've done in the past. At Notre Dame, that was more about the bus from Chicago over to South Bend, and that was a restricted deal where only a few folks had a chance to be a part of that. We had a great time with their sponsors and some of the lucky folks who were there with us, but there was a relatively limited availability. We're going to do something much bigger and broader for the game coming up in Jacksonville in a couple of weeks, and it is brought to you in part by our friends at R.S. Andrews. And, you know, right now, it's still hot right now, but that cold weather season's coming up here pretty soon. We get flashes of it from time to time. I've got the most cold-natured family in the world. They're always bundling up with blankets, and that always reminds me to make sure that my furnace is tuned up and running the way it needs to be, because winter is going to be here before you know it. That's why I'm always thinking about R.S. Andrews, the home of the guaranteed $99 tune-up. They're clean, screened, trained, and timely techs going to show up at your house. They'll give your furnace that big check to make sure it runs throughout the cold weather season coming up, and the best part's only $99. So check them out at rsandrews.com. They're the home of the guaranteed $99 furnace tune-up, and you can get that with R.S. Andrews. And, of course, Dari Payro and our folks over at R.S. Andrews, also big dog fans. We're looking forward to being with them there in Jacksonville. We appreciate them helping make the DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville a possibility. I want to let you hear from Justin Fields in just a moment. Fields has said something interesting this week about the question that's on everybody's mind, more outside of DawgNation than inside of DawgNation. I think Georgia fans kind of understand exactly why Fields would think he's got an opportunity for playing time at Georgia. This is sort of a curious thing for a lot of other folks. We'll let you hear more from Justin Fields coming up in just a moment. Before I get to that, though, I want to talk about another issue with the Georgia offense, because when Kirby Smart spoke to the media yesterday, he had some pretty interesting things to say about Mecole Hardman. And y'all know the story on Hardman right now. Hardman is one of the best athletes on Georgia's roster. That's clear. What's not clear, though, is exactly what position Hardman is best suited to play. It seems obvious now that it's going to be wide receiver. You've already seen Hardman make a big impact on special teams. I mean, he's within an eyelash of breaking seemingly every kick he gets a chance to return. But if he could just hold on to the ball a little more, he has a chance to also be a big-time wide receiver. And it's just that ability to kind of keep the fingers and hands on it and squeeze in that final catch. That's been the thing that has kind of held back Mecole Hardman just a little bit. Well, Kirby Smart was asked about that yesterday, made no bones about the fact that in some respects he's got to get better, but also did not mince words when it comes to Smart still having a lot of confidence in Mecole Hardman. Let me let you hear a little bit of that.
He's got to catch the ball. I mean, we're going to continue to throw it to him. We're not going to not throw it to him. I mean, I think Mecole's a work in progress. He's getting better each week. He's doing a good job in the return game. Nobody said it was going to be easy. I mean, it's not natural for a guy that didn't play receiver his whole life to go play receiver. And I know some of you guys in this room compare that to Terry Godwin. That's not true, because Terry Godwin played receiver. I recruited him. Mecole did not, and it makes it very different for him.
So Kirby Smart uses the phrase there, work in progress. I think that's true, but I think this work in progress also, and it sounds like Kirby Smart feels the same way, I believe that work in progress ongoing for Mecole Hardman will eventually lead to a player who's going to have a good career at Georgia. Now, is he a finished product right now? He's probably not. But of all the moments in which Georgia fans probably deserve to give a player patience, I think that Mecole Hardman is one of those guys that probably deserves some patience from Georgia fans. We may see a few more drops from him at some point in time this season, but the fact that Georgia keeps throwing it to him leads you to believe how important that Chaney and Smart believe that Hardman's eventually going to be as a part of this Georgia offense. And it's not like Mecole Hardman's not also contributing in other ways for this team at the moment. He's clearly doing that. As I mentioned before, he's got a crucial role for Georgia on special teams. He's helping Georgia win games and will probably help Georgia win more games with his special teams role. But this is a Bulldogs offense that is in great need of playmakers. And over the course of the next couple of years, some of those are going to be added to this program via recruiting. You think about a Zamir White, maybe a James Cook who come in for the class of 2018. Think about those top-flight wide receivers that kind of come in or expected to come in for the class of 2019. Guys like Jaden Hazelwood, guys like Dominic Blaylock. You fast forward a couple years in the future, Georgia's going to have almost a full complement of sort of perfectly prototype players at every single one of these offensive skill positions. For now, though, Georgia's kind of forced to work with what it has. And if we're going to be honest here, over the last couple of years, the Georgia wide receiving core has probably just not been as good as a program the caliber of Georgia should expect it to be. That's one of the reasons why Hardman right now, a work in progress at wide receiver, is one of Georgia's primary targets. It sort of speaks to the issues that Georgia's had at that position. But Hardman is a guy that you don't want to give up on, because Hardman eventually, as I said, I believe is going to have a really good career. As far as what he still needs to work on, well, Kirby Smart talked a little bit more about that as well.
No, it's running routes. It's being comfortable catching the ball. It's just 10 and 15 years of that's not what he did his whole life. So he's developing. He's working hard at it. I think the guy's going to make a really good player. And to be honest with you, he's caught every ball we've thrown to him in the past couple of weeks in practice. It's not like he's got the drops. He just hadn't had an opportunity. He hadn't had an opportunity in a game really in a while.
This is one of those things that also probably ties back to what we were saying before. Right now, Georgia has an efficient quarterback in Jake Fromm, who Jim Chaney's not choosing to use very much. So a lot of guys aren't going to have the big reception numbers you expect them to have, whether it be Hardman, who's also been impacted by some drops, or a freshman like J.J. Holloman, or a returning star from last year like Riley Ridley, or let's not even get started on this collection of tight ends. Right now, a lot of guys at Georgia have fewer receptions than you might think. But if Georgia does throw more in its biggest game still yet to come this season, then the fortunes of all these players might rise, Mecole Hardman included. Let me shift gears here for a moment before I welcome in our guests onto today's show to kind of look back at another interview that Justin Fields was recently a part of. Of course, you know the story with Fields, the five-star quarterback who committed to Georgia on Friday. And the big question nationally here has been, why would Fields, who's a quarterback that could one day be in the NFL, be on the same roster with two other quarterbacks, Jake Fromm and Jacob Eason, who have the same kind of goals and, frankly, even though the skill sets are different, the same kind of talent thresholds. Well, recently, Justin Fields made an appearance on Sirius XM's ESPNU radio, and he spoke pretty bluntly about exactly what he sort of views as the quarterback situation at Georgia and exactly how he kind of fits into all that. I think if you're a Georgia fan, you're going to like this from Justin Fields. Take a listen.
When choosing a college, you can't really worry about who's in front of you or who's played before you or anything like that. I'm not afraid to compete against anyone, so competition can only make you better. Iron sharpens iron, so my goal is just to go in there and just compete my butt off and work hard.
Listen, that may sound like a cliche, and some people may write it off as being that way. But isn't what Fields is saying there very similar to what Jake Fromm said last year, that he wasn't shying away from competition against Jacob Eason? He was true to his word on that. My guess is that Justin Fields will be true to his word on this too. And next year, next spring, next summer, whenever it starts to happen, you may see two really good quarterbacks, Fields, Fromm, Eason probably too, all competing against each other. That can only make Georgia better. All right, it's a fun show for us today on DawgNation Daily. Former Georgia quarterback David Greene coming up in just a moment. We'll have Mike Johnson, my partner on AT&T's SEC Country Live here in just a couple of seconds as well. Before any of that, though, let me remind you, as we move towards another weekend of college football action, a lot of y'all want to get bets down on these games. And, well, if you get your bet down, you want to win. You want that fast, no-hassle payout when you do win. That's what my friends at MyBookie are known for. But listen, that's not the only thing good for DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers when it comes to MyBookie. Right now, if you sign up as I'm speaking here, you'll also have your chance to get your first deposit matched up to 100%. You got to go to the website, mybookie.ag, use the promo code DawgNation, get your first deposit matched up to 100%. The website, mybookie.ag, promo code DawgNation. Make sure you sign up today. It's great to have you with us in the program. David Greene later, Mike Johnson right now. And I will say hello to my partner on AT&T's SEC Country Live. He is Mike Johnson. It's always fun kind of catching up with him when it comes to the situation both in the SEC and with the Georgia Bulldogs. And, Mike, I guess if you don't mind, first of all, let me say good morning and welcome to the program. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. You got me excited to lay some bets down on my bookie this weekend. I'm ready for it, brother.
That is good to hear, Mike. Well, one of the things I think that your alma mater and the school we talk about here on DawgNation Daily have in common right now is they are both trying to block out some positive talk. And I kind of get why, Nick Saban said what he said this week about the rat poison, even if rat poison was kind of a pretty sour way to say that. I get the message he's trying to send. Kirby Smart, in his own way, has kind of tried to send the same kind of message that, hey, media tells this team how good it is all the time. That's the kind of message you have to keep from creeping into practice, because that may cause some bad practice habits to seep in. All of a sudden, guys aren't working quite as hard as they once did. I guess let me ask you kind of a two-part question here. How tough is it to block out some of that positive talk? How necessary do you think that it is? And exactly what, as a team, did you do to kind of keep that from kind of coming in and affecting your mindset when you were at Alabama on your way to winning a national championship?
It's extremely tough, and I definitely think it's necessary. I mean, BA, you and I have been around it, all year this year. If you ask, half the teams, half the media, who they would go ahead and crown national champions, they'd go ahead and hand the award away. We're 6 weeks in, 7 weeks in, and some of these national media guys want to go ahead and hand the college football playoff 4 out. Haven't even seen the second half of the season, and that's what Nick Saban sees, and he understands that. Listen, you can be the belle of the ball today, and tomorrow night nobody will even invite you. You know what I mean? I think what's a little bit easier for Kirby Smart at Georgia right now is those players haven't been to that point yet. They still remember the previous regime. They still remember some of the letdowns under Mark Richt. So they're probably a little bit hungrier to get back to that point. That's how my career played out. You didn't have to remind me that it could go bad, because I was a part of some bad losses at Alabama. I knew what it was like to be at the bottom of the SEC West and everybody disrespecting you and everybody wondering about your tenacity and everybody wondering if you're a good college football player. That really drove a lot of us through the rest of our careers and allowed us to talk to some of the younger guys on the team and say, hey, look, we're getting crowned right now. We're number 1 in the country, number 2 in the country, number 3 in the country. But we still have a lot of games left to play, and we've seen how fast things can turn around in a hurry. I think that plays a little bit into what Kirby Smart's dealing with right now, because a lot of these players still have that hunger and that fight to get to the top. So it's a little bit different than what Nick Saban's dealing with, whereas at Alabama, a lot of those guys on that team think you just show up and wear crimson and you're going to win a national title at Alabama. It's not how it works in either one of those scenarios, and it's a tough deal for coaches these days to have to deal with social media and to have to deal with a 24-hour news cycle and everybody from your fans to the media members, patting them on the back, because we're only halfway through the season, and that really can be a poisonous attitude if you think you arrived after week 6.
There is one thing, though, that Alabama seems to have going for it in this scenario that Georgia kind of doesn't. It's not because Georgia's better than Alabama, but Alabama just gets a little bit more attention than Georgia. Alabama has some legitimate doubters, and I mean the people who would put Clemson number 1 over Alabama. So in a way, Nick Saban's got something he can use, because there's at least that one bit of, hey, here's some people who don't think you're good enough, and Alabama only gets that because they've been good enough to warrant the extra attention that when Clemson's ranked number 1 over Alabama, it sort of feels like a slide against the Crimson Tide. Georgia right now kind of doesn't really have that. There's not some big public message of, well, Georgia's not as good as a lot of people think they are, because Georgia's just now kind of arriving on that national stage. Based on what you just sort of described, do you think Georgia needs to find a few more doubters out there to make this a little bit easier to kind of keep pushing down the tracks?
I don't. I definitely think that's probably something that Kirby Smart will try to do. I think he probably keeps that in his back pocket until they get, he'll bring up the history, the past history of the Florida rivalry or the Auburn rivalry, and he'll try to show that to his players and be like, look, anything can happen in this game. People are going to doubt you. Still a lot of people that are going to go out and pick, a Florida Gators team that's seemingly down. But like I said, I think he's got it in his corner that his players are playing at a hunger level that I don't. You can tell me, B. I haven't seen from Georgia in quite some time. They look so hungry and so tenacious and just flying everywhere with so much energy that you can tell that they're really trying to get to the top of the heap. And in my opinion, if you're looking at any football team in the country right now and saying they're invincible, you haven't watched enough of that team. I think every team in the country, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, no matter who you want to point to, Penn State, I think they all have places where they can, get a lot better on their team and can possibly be beat. So, I think it's going to be up to Kirby Smart to help his team find that edge. The season is a grind. It's extremely tough to go undefeated. It's extremely tough to show up week in and week out. So sometimes you do have to find that edge. But from the look that I've seen on the field at Georgia this year, those players are hungry enough as it is. I know it's going to be tough to keep it up week in and week out, but, man, those guys look like they're playing at another level.
And I will say this, you were talking about the difference you're seeing in Georgia right now compared to previous Georgia teams. Another example of that was when Smart spoke to the media yesterday, he once again complimented this team for having a pretty good practice, even though part of it was indoors, part of it was outdoors, and it was actually really hot in Athens yesterday like it was in a lot of places around the South. But Smart still complimented the practice. Mike, you know this. Kirby Smart's kind of cut from that Nick Saban mold. He is not throwing out some sort of empty compliment when it comes to practicing hard. You have to have a very good practice to have Kirby Smart call it a good practice. But sort of day in, day out, Kirby Smart's starting these media availabilities with saying he's liking the way this team practices. That may be the best example of how Georgia's kind of not falling prey to some of this kind of stuff because of the fact they seem to still be hitting it hard during practice every single day.
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you another thing it tells me is that they have extremely good leadership right now. They have a lot of upperclassmen on that team that are doing the same things that I was just talking about, that remember the down years, that remember their coach being fired a couple years ago and say, hey, look, I understand we have good recruits coming in. I understand that you guys were 5-stars and 4-star recruits, but I'm telling you right now, you just don't show up and win games. This happens on the practice field throughout the week. And they have to be commended for that because, listen, I've been in those situations where it's indoor, outdoor, and you're going through the rigors and you get in the dog days in the middle of the season and it's hot. And that's tough to do. It's tough to show up and not, sort of feel sorry for yourself and say, man, I can't wait to get out of here. Man, there's a big game on TV tonight I want to get to. Or, man, I want to go hang out with my girlfriend. To be able to show up and put in 2.5 hours of work on that field, show up in meetings and watch film week in and week out, day in and day out, it's a tough thing. And to me, it points to a very, very strong leadership at the top of that Georgia team.
One of the things that we talked about on AT&T SEC Country Live yesterday, which I hope people will all check out on the SEC Country Facebook page at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, was Nick Chubb. And, Kirby Smart had talked about his chances of winning the Heisman Trophy. He actually leads the SEC in rushing yards. I think he's second in touchdowns. I mean, he kind of is putting together a pretty interesting statistical profile, but not getting a lot of attention for these awards. It sounds like you think, though, if Georgia can continue to kind of put together a good season, that Chubb could actually be in that conversation by the end of the year.
I definitely do. It's like I said yesterday, the path is there. The path is laid out. It's going to be up to not only Nick Chubb, but this Georgia offensive line and the offense as a whole to really continue to put up the stats that he's put up. Like I said, it's tough to continue that throughout the year. But I remember back to Derrick Henry a few years ago, the second half of the season is when he really started kicking in and becoming a Heisman favorite. And right now, when you look around the SEC, there's not really another running back that jumps out at you in terms of SEC play. I think if Georgia continues to win, continues to do the great things up front, and Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel continue to thrive in the backfield, that the path will be there because Georgia will continue to play. They will play against Auburn. They will play against Georgia Tech at the end of the year, and they will be in that SEC championship game against probably somebody pretty good from the Western Division that will be another opportunity for Nick Chubb to shine on the national stage. So, I wouldn't go in right now and say he's my favorite. He's actually probably a good long shot bet right now, if you ask me. But the path is there. I think this is one of those things where you kind of control your own destiny as far as Nick Chubb and Georgia go and win this Heisman, because if he can continue to do the same things he's done and continue to be that dangerous Nick Chubb that we've come to know, he'll have the opportunity to get there and get to New York at the end of the season.
You mentioned those long shot odds. You mentioned these yesterday. Do you remember about what they were? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you kind of said this yesterday. Do you remember kind of about where the Chubb odds were? Because when you said this yesterday, I thought, you know what, compared to some of these other guys, that's actually not a bad bet.
Yeah, they were extremely valuable bets, in my opinion. I think the ones I saw yesterday, Saquon Barkley was leading at plus 175, I want to say. I think Jalen Hurts was number one in the SEC at something like plus 3,500. And I think that Nick Chubb was right behind there in plus 6,500, plus 6,000 range. So, a solid payoff for somebody that would want to go in and bet some money. Obviously, those are long shot odds right now and for a good reason. But like I said, I really do feel like the path is there. This is not a guy and a team that's not going to get a chance to advance on a national stage. Sometimes when you see a guy out in the Pac-12 or you see a guy that plays for one of the lesser-known teams, you say, well, he's a good player. He's going to rack up the yards, but I don't know if his team will crack the top 10. I don't know if his team will be in the national title conversation or that voters will get a chance to see the guy. That's not the case for Nick Chubb. He's going to be in some primetime games. He's playing on a great football team right now, and his numbers, leading the SEC in rushing, continue to improve week after week.
So I want to talk to you about the Georgia defense for a moment, because I think there's this belief, and I think it's probably a justifiable belief, that Dogs still have a problem when it comes to the secondary. And against what looks to be an overmatched opponent, Missouri, on Saturday, there's actually an attempt that, or an assumption that Georgia could be challenged a little bit because Drew Lock's pretty good at throwing the football. Missouri's got a couple good wide receivers. When you've watched Georgia this season, do you see that it's a front seven that can kind of play with anybody, but a secondary that can be challenged? I mean, I think the game plan for Vanderbilt was trying to throw the ball, and to a certain extent they had some success doing that. I think Tennessee wanted to, but Dormady was obviously just not very good in the game. I think Notre Dame tried that. I think Mississippi State tried that. Do you see vulnerability when you look at the Georgia secondary?
Yeah, I don't know that vulnerability is the right answer. I think there's definitely room for improvement. I think when you're a team that's game planning against this Georgia defense right now, that it's hard to really go out and think you're going to take advantage of some of the things that secondary is going to be doing, because that front seven is so good. You can sit there and run these route combinations all you want to and understand these double moves that you're going to put on these supposedly weak defensive backs from Georgia. But with those guys rushing off the edge and that front seven that Kirby Smart's been able to wreak havoc in the backfield so far this year, I'm not sure a lot of those game plans will come together if you're looking at making throws downfield. I think that the ability is there. If you can find solid protection somehow against Georgia, which is going to be extremely tough, then maybe that secondary can be had. If they're out there covering for 3, 4, and 5 seconds, it is going to be a tough job for that secondary moving forward. But I don't know how any team gets there until at least the end of the year, because that front seven has been so good and so dangerous at getting to the backfield. None of these quarterbacks that Georgia is going to match up with anytime soon are going to have a ton of time to throw the ball, maybe until they get to that Auburn game. And so when you look at it, maybe a little bit of weakness later in the year, especially when you go up against that deep Auburn receiving core right now. But I just don't know. I don't know that you can sit there and game plan and say, you know what, let's run these long route combinations, because I don't think they'll have time to get them off.
But that's a really interesting point. But it also makes me think back when you start to look ahead at those Auburn game, potentially Alabama in the SEC championship, or whoever Georgia might play if it were to get to the SEC championship. Those are going to be pressure-packed moments. And, in the Notre Dame game, Georgia probably doesn't win that game if it wasn't for Davin Bellamy in the clutch coming up with the sack. Lorenzo Carter also in kind of a high-pressure situation. He comes up with the sack. You're going to have to see that Georgia pass rush kind of return to the form it had in the Notre Dame game, because Georgia needed every bit of that quarterback pressure just to beat the Irish. And if you think about an Auburn, if you think about an SEC championship, it's kind of that same moment where Georgia's pass rush has to come up just as big there as it did against Notre Dame. Otherwise, that secondary might get tested a little more than some Georgia fans wanted to be able to.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm not going to lie to you and say there's not a level of concern. For a guy like me that picked Georgia to beat Auburn, this year, when you look at that game and start scouting it out, head-to-head, opponent-wise, and how these game plans might kind of unfold, I think that there is going to be some ability for Auburn to beat some of the coverage that Georgia's going to have. It's just the nature of the beast right now in college football as far as offenses go, that the key to that game for me is going to be Georgia's offense and their ability to run the ball, and Jake Fromm, finally to be able to open up some of this downfield passing game. Because if you ask me, Auburn is going to score. I think they're going to score on Georgia. I think they're going to score on Alabama. Their efficiency right now is just too high. But when you look at the way Auburn matched up against Clemson, now they are a way different team now, especially on that offensive line, than they were against Clemson. But when you look at the way they matched up against Clemson and the way they really couldn't get things going because of the dominance up front from that Clemson defensive line, I think it does give you a little sliver of hope that there will be some ability for Georgia to kind of shut down some of the things that Auburn's doing up front. I don't think by any means that Auburn's receiving core is going to be able to be locked up later in the year, or that Jared Stidham will have some other off game and play terribly. But it's going to be up to that Georgia offense, in my opinion, to really go out and be able to win this game against Auburn later in the year.
We'll finish up with this. I don't know how much you've seen Missouri. I'll admit I haven't really watched much of Missouri this season. That's who Georgia obviously plays on Saturday, though. From what you have seen, is this a team that's as bad as a 31-point deficit and point spread against Georgia would suggest? Maybe a chance they're a little better than some of us have given them credit for. They almost beat Kentucky on Saturday. Probably would have had a chance to if not for a bad call at the end of that game. You have a take on Missouri right now?
Yeah, I definitely do have a take on Missouri right now. I got a chance to watch their game against Kentucky last week, and here's what I'll say about Missouri. I think they've got some playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. I think they have some guys that can go up and get the ball, and at this point in their season and their coaching staff and the way they're looking at this game, they're going to have a puncher's chance because, they have a guy at quarterback in Drew Lock who's not afraid to unleash this ball and let it rip downfield. It's like it's almost like every game for Drew Lock, he's playing in the playoffs and just doesn't want to keep the ball in his hand and doesn't want to give anybody else a chance. It's like he's just like, man, you know what? I'm going to go give these guys a chance. And that's what he did against Kentucky last week. They had a pretty successful week. Now, obviously, that Kentucky defense is not what Georgia's going to be. But like I said, they've got an ability on offense to go up and get the ball and make some things happen. They have some speed. They have some playmakers. They're not very good up front. Georgia should be able to run the ball completely down their throat and rack up about 400 rushing yards on them. But I've seen crazier things happen, and so I'm not just going to say this one's a slam dunk. But this is a game that Georgia should run away with by 4 touchdowns, in my opinion. Mike,
we'll see you on AT&T SEC Country Live this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the SEC Country Facebook page. Have a good day.
Sounds good, B. I look forward to it, buddy.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff there from Mike Johnson. We do look forward to AT&T SEC Country Live this afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the SEC Country Facebook page. Always a fun conversation. And I think what Mike says there about the Auburn game for Georgia is a really important thing to remember. I started this show today by talking about how Jake Fromm's numbers better than some people realize, actually having a pretty efficient season when you look at it from a yards per attempt standpoint, as opposed to just sort of the total passing yards, which are heavily influenced by how much you've thrown the ball. Another quarterback in that same conversation is Auburn's Jared Stidham, who also has not been asked to throw it much this season because of the fact that earlier in the year, the Auburn offensive line was really struggling with pass protection, and Auburn just got a really good collection of running backs. Kerryon Johnson leads the country in touchdowns for the season, but yards per attempt, efficiency, Jared Stidham's right there as well. The Auburn offense on pace for kind of a historic level of productivity. We talked about that on AT&T's SEC Country Live yesterday, and a collision course for these two teams when they do play in November, Georgia and Auburn. Jared Stidham starting to have a very good year, and the Auburn offense for the moment is really rolling. Before we kind of dive into our SEC through, let me also remind you, I mentioned the DawgNation invasion to Jacksonville a little earlier. It's also brought to you in part by our friends from Kroger. And, Kroger is your Halloween hangout when it comes to candy, decorations, and everything you need to make your trick-or-treating fun. My family loves Halloween. And we love doing our shopping for Halloween right there at Kroger, including those big giant pumpkins. And they've got that great section like right there in the middle of the store that has all the Halloween stuff. My kids cannot get enough of that. So we do know Kroger's the place to think about when you're thinking about Halloween. We appreciate them sponsoring our DawgNation invasion. All right, a couple SEC stories I want to get to here before I bring in David Greene on today's show. Weird story coming out of Tennessee. Now, I guess when it's all said and done, it's all for naught because Quentin Dormady was at practice yesterday. But there was the Rivals.com report that Dormady, upon being benched, not going to start on Saturday in South Carolina, had decided to leave the program. And Mike Griffith was also writing about this at SECCountry.com that Garantano had definitely been getting those first-team reps, and there were those rumors out there that Dormady was going to leave. Well, part of that was true. Garantano is getting the first-team reps. What's not true here is that Dormady is apparently leaving the team. He's at least not doing that right now. So I don't know if he's coming back for some of those leadership reps or whatever it was that Butch Jones was talking about the other day, but a real mess for Tennessee at quarterback. And the point that I made yesterday about this is that if you're a coach and you can't make a quarterback change without the quarterback that gets demoted from quitting and leaving the team, then you've lost control of that team. Now, there's an element of this that makes Dormady not look very good, but there's also an element of this that makes Butch Jones not look very good, because you've got to have enough leadership and control that you can make decisions without chaos and anarchy kind of spinning out from all of that. When it comes to this quarterback situation, that's not the way it happened. Butch Jones cannot stay out of the tabloids. Whether it be the fight with Trey Smith the other day, the fight with Nigel Warrior and Shai Tuttle that Jones lied about, or kind of anything else, Butch Jones cannot stay off the back page of the tabloids, and that's maybe the biggest reason why Jones may have a hard time sticking around Tennessee. All right, I thought Christopher Walsh had a really interesting piece at SECCountry.com. I talked about this with Mike Johnson a moment ago. What Walsh says, and he's an Alabama writer, is that Nick Saban, whose birthday happens to be Halloween, October the 31st, the same day the first college football playoff rankings come out, what Walsh says is that Alabama would actually benefit if Clemson were ranked number one. And the best birthday present Saban could get on his birthday would be to have Clemson ranked number one. I kind of understand where he's coming from on this. That would give Alabama that little extra edge. And I think right now we're in a situation where Georgia could kind of use some of the same kind of stuff. And as I said a moment ago, the reason why Georgia's absent from some of this is simply because of the fact they haven't been on the national stage as much as Alabama has. But it's certainly helpful to be kind of getting that kind of attention. We'll see if Georgia gets some in the weeks ahead. Speaking of attention, Les Miles, we got a lot of attention on Saturday as he'll be back in Baton Rouge. They're going to honor the 2007 national championship team. As LSU gets ready to play Auburn on Saturday. The coach of that team, obviously Les Miles, he was invited. He is accepted. He will be there. I get the desire to want to honor the 2007 team, but man, you want to talk about the potential for a sideshow, circus-type atmosphere? Let LSU not be playing well with Les Miles in the building. That could really, really be a mess. One more story I want to get to. Of course, the SEC Championship, each and every year they honor the SEC legends. They announced the latest crop of legends around the SEC for Georgia, Champ Bailey. Obviously, Bailey, a great career with the Dogs on both sides of the ball, and Bailey will be honored in December as an SEC legend, and that is a distinction well-deserved by him. A lot of Georgia fans have great memories of seeing Champ Bailey in a Georgia uniform, even with the black stripe down the center of the helmet. It was still fun watching Champ Bailey, and congratulations on him for being an SEC legend. We'll make that your SEC through, and we'll get ready to welcome in David Greene to the program, the former Georgia quarterback, a part of a big autograph signing this Saturday before the Missouri game at Tailgate Apparel. That's 279 East Broad Street in Athens, Georgia. It's right there in the old Harry Bissett's building. And David, dogs are rolling right now. It's fun to talk to you about it. Welcome back to the program. How you doing today?
Well, Brandon, good to be on. Yeah, I tell you what, you're dead on, man. This team's fun to watch, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's kind of the place I wanted to start our conversation today, because you see the game probably differently than I do, because you were on the field and you know the intricacies of everything that Georgia's trying to do on both sides of the ball. So specifically for you, how much fun are you having right now, and how impressed are you by what to the naked eye just seems to be solid execution really in all phases right now?
Well, the thing that, Brandon, is so fun to see is it looks like you've got guys that absolutely love to play. They love to get after. They love to compete. That's the one thing, everybody can tell by watching Kirby. I mean, he's intense. And the fun thing about it is you sit there and you watch these guys, and it doesn't matter who we're playing. It doesn't matter what the score is. There's one way you're going to play football, and it's all out. And if you're on offense, your job is put in the end zone. It doesn't matter if you're up by 45 or whatnot. It's their job to stop you. And if it's on defense, it doesn't matter if you're up by 35, go get the quarterback. And in this team right now, it doesn't matter if the first string's in, second string's in, it's that next man up mentality. And you can just tell, man, the team's playing with a lot of confidence. The one thing in years past, you always watch Georgia play, we kind of, fundamentally, we weren't doing the little things right. Yeah. And you're seeing our team doing all those little things right, not beating ourselves. And it's just like, it's fun to watch, and it's fun to see a team with this much confidence.
Yeah, I started the show today by also talking a little bit about Jake Fromm, who's, I believe, having a better year than some people are giving him credit for. You look at his yards per attempt, he's actually a pretty efficient quarterback. But one thing that some fans, David, say is he hasn't been asked to do a lot yet. Do you think it's time to start asking for a little more from this Georgia passing game, or the imbalance heavily favoring the run? Is that the right game plan for Georgia right now?
No, I mean, why would you ask him to do more than what he has to? I mean, right now, when you have Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, Swift, we can go to Holyfield, we can go to Harry. We have so many running backs. I mean, why give them more than what we need to? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to win a football game. And I think the problem is we're so used to playing like fantasy football where we look at stats. But at the end of the day, the name of the game is to win. And when you got a good defense, and you've got solid special teams, and you've got an efficient quarterback and a great running game, you can win championships that way. And Alabama's done it for a long time where, there's been a lot of quarterbacks that won SEC championships at Alabama that don't go on and have great, pro careers. And they can do it because that's their style. That's the way they've won games and they won championships. So you can win a bunch of different ways. And I like the way because we're finally kind of forming an identity, which we didn't have at all last year offensively. And this year, I mean, we've got that good running game, and I think Fromm's done outstanding. I mean, there's times he's looked like a true freshman, but all in all, he's made some big plays. He's not turning the ball over, and he's playing with a ton of confidence.
Have you been able to see Justin Fields, any kind of highlights, anything like that from him? He obviously commits to Georgia on Friday, and he's getting a lot of attention from a lot of Georgia fans because they like the skill set that he's put on display at the high school level. What have you seen from Fields, and how impressed have you been with what you have seen?
Well, I didn't know anything about him really, but I did see the news when he came out and he committed to Georgia, so I did turn on some YouTube and watched him. And tremendous talent. I mean, as a 5-star, #1 recruit in the country, I figured he would be. And I will say this, I do think having a dual-threat type quarterback is such an advantage in college because, there's days for every quarterback where you're just not throwing the ball that well, or maybe the conditions are bad, it's raining, and ball's wet. And you can always sometimes rely and make plays with your legs. I mean, we've seen Deshaun Watson do that a few times. We're throwing the ball through the air in college. He wasn't all that successful at times where he wasn't doing quite as well that week, and he could still use his legs to get first downs and keep the drives alive. Tim Tebow somewhat the same way. So anytime you got a quarterback that can use his legs as well as his arms, that's a nightmare for defenses.
Tailgate Apparel's 279 East Broad Street in Athens before the game against Missouri on Saturday, a big autograph signing. And, David, you're going to be a part of this one, I believe, and I think it's also former Georgia coach Vince Dooley there as well to kind of bring two great eras together, the 80s era, your era there in the early 2000s. And Tailgate's done this every single week for all the Georgia home games, these fun autograph signings. And I think this week's going to be especially fun for a lot of folks who kind of remember both those eras of Georgia football.
Well, it's fun. Look, anytime I get a chance to see Coach Dooley, it's a treat. And I'm hoping he'll bring Barbara with him as well because you talk about somebody who'll light up the room now. Barbara's a trip, and she knows how to have a good time. So obviously what Coach has been able to do at the University of Georgia, my goodness, he's got a statue out there as you get close to the Buttsmere. Just a legend, great guy, loves coming back. The thing I love about Coach, it's been many years since he's played or since he was a coach and the athletic director, but he still loves coming to the games on Saturday and signing and spending time with the fans. And so, we'll be there between 1:30 and 3:30. I imagine Saturday the atmosphere is going to be incredible because, like I said, so many people right now love watching the way Georgia's playing football. I got friends that aren't even Georgia fans that say that they love watching the Dogs right now just because they're just fun to watch.
Well, David, that's well said, and always great to have you here on DawgNation Daily. We'll look forward to seeing you Saturday at Tailgate Apparel there in Athens in the old Harry Bissett's building, and it'll be fun to talk to you some more about some Georgia football later on as we get ready for Florida after Missouri on Saturday. And don't you know that'll be a big one for the Dogs?
No doubt, buddy. Brandon, appreciate you, my man.
Talk to you soon.
All right, take care. See you, buddy.
Good stuff there from David Greene. Always having a good time with him here on DawgNation Daily. Hope you will check out the autograph signing with he and former Georgia coach Vince Dooley coming up Saturday at Tailgate Apparel in Athens. That's 279 East Broad Street there. Let me say a couple things before we wrap up. First of all, go to shopdawgnation.com. You can get, we have a small handful. I mean, 1 or 2 of these shirts left. But our Dog Nation Daily Gatorator t-shirts, I think we have some smalls, maybe some triple X's. They may be gone soon, so please make sure you check those out at shopdognation.com. You can still get one or two more of those left. I'll also say this as well. We talked about Mecole Hardman a little earlier in the show, and Hardman's difficulty transitioning from defense, which he played last year, to offense, which he's playing now at wide receiver. And, I think a lot of times fans just have a tendency to expect this to be easier than it actually is. And Champ Bailey, who we kind of talked about a moment ago, is one of the SEC legends. Maybe Bailey affects our opinion on this because he made it look easy, but it's actually a little tougher than it appears to be. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you with us right now, we'll look forward to having your comments on video. You want to weigh in on anything. I thought that David Greene's words about Jake Fromm pretty interesting, that even though Fromm could be asked to do more and would probably succeed in doing so, at least have a really good chance of succeeding in doing so. I like David's response there. But why would you, when you've got this staple of running game, this staple of running backs, creating such a potent running game for Georgia, why would you do more than you have to do? I think it's an interesting thing from David Greene there. You can weigh in on that or the thoughts about Fromm from a little earlier in the show and kind of anything else in between. All right, so Jimmy Barnes says he's having a little trouble with the comment section. They freeze when I start watching the video. Same thing happened yesterday. If anybody else had the same problem Jimmy is, let me know. We'll kind of talk about it. Sometimes, and the people who work with us on the show will tell you the same thing, Facebook is kind of a weird, fickle thing. Because for the most part, I'm able to kind of follow comments throughout the show, but every now and then I have to, get out of Facebook and, close the browser and then get back in to kind of have it work out. So y'all know that I'm, the worst person in the world to answer any kind of technology problem, but Facebook can be kind of a fickle beast at times. Danny Smith talking about Tyson Campbell committing to the G. Boy, that'd be nice to add a 5-star cornerback and a true cornerback. And I'm a big believer that when you look at, national championship teams, one of the things that sort of separates national championship teams from other teams are those true cornerbacks. Not defensive backs, not athletes, not speedsters, not guys who might play safety or might be able to cross-train at cornerback, but actual cornerbacks. I mean, if anything, the thing that's made Alabama so good over the last couple of years, if you want to go back to, probably 2014, Alabama's secondary was actually a little bit of a weakness. And one of the things that made Alabama better in 2015 and 16 was that they kind of changed the profile of athlete they were using in the secondary. Gone were the really big safeties. Alabama goes big at every position, but it does not really go big at safety anymore. It really plays 4, and in a nickel situation, 5 true cornerbacks. I mean, for the most part, Minkah Fitzpatrick as a safety is the kind of guy that could also play cornerback. That's just what Alabama's kind of looking for there. And I think that's what championship teams should be looking for too, and Georgia's kind of in that same boat. It's one of the reasons why Tyson Campbell, the possibility they could be in the mix for Georgia here in the class of 2018 is one of the biggest possible wins Georgia could get. And on that Tennessee day a couple Saturdays ago when Gilbert Frierson, who's also a really good-looking prospect, if a notch below Campbell, Frierson may be a notch below Campbell, but a notch higher in terms of the likelihood of being able to earn a commitment from him. I think that you could flip Frierson from Miami. I think you might be able to. But when Frierson and Campbell and Tyreek Johnson, who's probably more of an actual safety, but when these guys were all committing, or I should say tweeting about Georgia the other day on the same day, I thought that was a really interesting development for Georgia's 2018 class, and I think at least a couple of those guys are more likely than not to maybe be Georgia commits. Let me hit a few more comments here. Trevante Chambers talking about Texas A&M said had they had a great defense, but their offense couldn't move the ball. That's when they lost to Bama. We got offense and defense. Trevante, you may be right about that. Eric Green says running game's on point, having a scary passing game backs the safeties up and will open up more running lanes. And that's true. But here's the other reason why Georgia may eventually need a passing game. As hard as it may seem to believe right now because Georgia's just rolling everybody, Georgia may be playing from behind at some point during the second half. I mean, and that's really when your passing game becomes a necessity, when you're actually having to make up some ground. Georgia just hasn't been doing that much lately and may not do that for a few weeks. But if Georgia's really heading to where people think it is heading, at some point in time, Georgia's going to need a big fourth quarter to do that. And at that point in time, if you're trailing and if the clock is ticking, then you probably do have to throw the ball at that point and move away from your running game at least a little bit. Georgia wouldn't do that by design at the beginning of games, but may be asked to do that at some point near the end of the game. And the point that I tried to start the show with today was if Jake Fromm is put in that spot, there is plenty of evidence to suggest he'll do just fine there. You don't need to do that right now, but if you ever were in that situation, I think the numbers that I gave you off the top of the show suggest that Fromm would be pretty good if he got there. Travis Griffin says it would be nice to end Florida's streak of not being shut out. 366 games, defense wins championships. Yeah, I've heard a little bit of that lately, too. I guess they have the longest streak in the country of not being shut out. Is that correct? That'd be a great thing to be able to do. Obviously, any win against Florida would be great. But, yeah, there'd be some happy times here on DawgNation Daily if Georgia's pitching a shutout against Florida. Travis Kelly said, did I see Elite 11 with Justin Fields in the NFL Network? High praises from retired NFLers. So, Travis, I didn't see that, but I'd like to see that. I did see this thing last night, and this is totally off the subject, but did y'all see, I was flipping channels last night on the NFL Network. They had one of these almost like the old two-a-day show, Hoover, or maybe a little bit like what maybe Last Chance U is like. They had this thing on Valdosta High School in the NFL Network. It must be a series because they were like back-to-back episodes on. That thing looked pretty good. Now, I didn't get a chance to watch the whole thing because I go to bed pretty early, but I kind of like that. When did they start doing this series on Valdosta High School in the NFL Network? That's kind of interesting to see. Some of y'all live in Valdosta. I'm sure y'all have seen that. Mike Mazzell says Florida's been a mental problem for us every year. Mike, I think at a certain point that did become true for Georgia. Somewhere around 2002, Georgia started losing games to Florida for reasons other than Florida just had the better team. If you want to look for the entire decade of the 90s into the early part of the 2000s, there was a pretty simple explanation for why Florida was beating Georgia. Florida was just better. Better program, better players, better coach, better everything. Somewhere around 2002, that kind of changed. All of a sudden, Georgia had the better team and the better program, but it was still losing those head-to-head matchups. There is, some evidence there to say that it became a bit of a mental hurdle for Georgia. I don't think this Georgia team falls prey to the same kind of stuff, though, because I think the mental approach to each game is just better. I think Kirby Smart minimizes the stuff that can be distraction and maximizes the things that can lead to motivation. And my guess is he'll do that against Florida as well. But it's obvious that he needs to. It's obvious that Kirby Smart, building his reputation in his second season, needs to win this game against Florida. I don't want to go down this road at all, but even for Mark Richt, who in his second season took a giant leap forward. We've talked about in the past here how consequential year twos have been for so many coaches around the SEC, but even in Mark Richt's second season, a year in which he won 13 games, still lost to Florida. I don't want to go down that road, but that's obviously a bad memory for a lot of Georgia fans, and one of the things that Kirby Smart has an opportunity this year to kind of correct about Georgia's history, and my guess is that Kirby Smart will do just that. Armand Rashad says the NFL Network show in Valdosta has a lot of people around here upset, and he puts upset in all capitals. I'd love to hear more about that. The only part that I saw made Valdosta look good, but I only watched a couple of minutes of it. But I guess I'm not a little bit surprised to hear that. I think that reality TV has a way of changing everything, and it sort of maximizes things that you don't want, minimizes things that you maybe want sort of thought about your program. It's one of the reasons why I'm glad that Georgia has never been on that Showtime show or the Hard Knock show. I mean, I think Mike Johnson was playing for the Falcons when they were on Hard Knocks. We could probably ask him about that sometime. In Hard Knocks is the HBO show that covers the NFL. Reality TV just has a way of distorting things. So I guess if I was a Valdosta superintendent or athletic director or head coach, I guess I probably would have not wanted my program displayed on TV like that, but it's kind of easy to kind of get star-eyed when somebody comes around. Philip Jordan Wells says mental hurdles are rat poison. Philip, well said. Very Coach Saban-esque of you. Hank Watson says Kirby's an alum, and beating the Lizards is near and dear to his heart. That's true. If anybody should appreciate the value of a Florida win, it ought to be Kirby Smart. Now, publicly, he kind of pushes back against this, and I actually know somebody that even asked him privately one time about, hey, come on, isn't Florida really the best rivalry? And even privately, to this one person, he said the same thing that he's always said publicly, that, no, Georgia's got a lot of rivals, and all the games are big, and all the games are important. I hope in his heart and his mind he feels differently on that, because y'all know how I feel. I believe it's supposed to be the biggest game of all, but I hope that's the case. Anzio Gibson says Trey Hill trending. Yeah, certainly it seems like the news is good for Georgia. I know that Jeff talked about this when he was with us on DawgNation Daily yesterday, that Hill's got at least 2 more visits coming to Georgia here. Hill is one of those guys that's thought to be close to Justin Fields, and any kind of flirtation with Auburn and some of those visits that Hill was taking to Auburn a few weeks ago. I think with Fields at Georgia, I think the likelihood of Hill viewing Georgia as the place to be probably goes up here. Neil Landon Jackson says, I'm in Tallahassee right now sporting my dog gear in cinnamon roll territory. That's pretty funny. I don't really know why that's cinnamon roll territory, but I like the line nonetheless. Justin Turner said Kirby Smart sounded stunned by having 50 carries last week. Yeah, I watched that on video myself and saw where, Kirby, I guess, was talking about the number of carries that Georgia had in the game. He said, what was it, about 30 or so? And then a media person came back and said, no, it was 50, and he was blown away by that. That's a lot of carries, and it also led to a lot of yards for Georgia, more than 400 yards rushing against Vanderbilt. Mac McDonald said, what's the news on the supposed flip from Michigan? You're talking about Reese, the linebacker, and that's a guy that is kind of right there in that sort of high flip category. You make a list of the most likely flips right now. I think Reese, the Michigan commit, is one of those guys. I think that Frierson, the Miami commit, may be one of those guys. I think that Cooper, the Florida State commit, may be one of those guys, and then you can decide how real the Stephon Wynn thing is. I haven't heard as much about Brenton Cox lately at Ohio State, but the other 3 definitely, maybe Wynn 4. I probably wouldn't put Cox in that group right now, but I would say that those are probably the 4 most likely flips. Am I leaving somebody out, or do some of y'all disagree with that assessment? You can weigh in on that. Armand Rashad says, a loyal member of DawgNation, I propose just that we call the school down south of Lizards from here on out. Yeah, that's not a bad idea, especially after those uniforms you're going to wear on Saturday. Philip Jordan Wells says, just think if Jacksonville is lower Camden County, we'll be fine. Yeah, I mean, Philip, I'll tell you this, in terms of, the relationship that Georgia has with that community. I know it's a touchy subject. I'm in favor of keeping the game in Jacksonville. I know some people are kind of not. That's one of those things where I think reasonable people can disagree, even though I do feel strongly that that's a really fun, special tradition for Georgia, and it stands out among the rest of college football. And as far as Jacksonville and its relationship to Georgia, I mean, I can tell you that my family, we vacation every single year in Amelia Island, and Amelia Island's in Florida. But if you're there on a regular, summer week, the idea that Amelia Island's Gator country is foreign. That is not Gator country. Amelia Island, about an hour north of Jacksonville, maybe about 45 minutes north of Jacksonville, below the Florida border, though. That's as Georgia as you can get. You see Georgia banners hanging in the shops and a lot of that kind of stuff. I'm not telling you there's not some Florida fans there, but this notion that, forget St. Simon's and Jekyll, which are very close and all about the Dogs. Amelia Island is a big-time Georgia hotbed, I can promise you. And we even have some people that watch us on this program that live in Fernandina Beach. They'll tell you about that. Cassidy Dover says, how many 5-stars total could follow Fields? The 5-star thing is kind of interesting. I don't know how many 5-star, but I know it's a whole host of 4-stars. I'll add Luke Ford to that group. I know he had some pretty provocative quotes to Jeff Sintel this week at DawgNation.com. Apparently he's got 2 other schools tied with Georgia at the moment. I'm guessing it's probably good news for Ford when it's all said and done. Neil Landon Jackson said that the reason why he calls Florida State the Seminoles, that's what my niece calls them. That's kind of funny. That's kind of funny. I have not heard that one before. But yeah, I think Luke Ford, could potentially be coming to Georgia here. I think Kieras Jackson's already coming to Georgia because of Fields. That's a couple 4-stars. Does Fields have a positive impact on Jamari Sawyer? That's a 5-star. By the way, one of the things we may play on this show this week, I'll give you a little preview of it right now. So Kirby was talking about yesterday how well coached Pace Academy offensive linemen are. And it kind of reminds you of what Kirby said about Peach County before Kieras Jackson committed. Remember, he's like, hey, boy, Peach County's got the toughest practices I've ever seen. Peach County's this, Peach County's that. And then a couple days later, Kieras is committing to Georgia. He said the thing the other day about quarterbacks, about how, hey, I've never seen a quarterback that cared about depth charts. The good ones never do. That seemed like a subtle message to Justin Fields. And then you had maybe a subtle message to Jamari Sawyer yesterday with who's obviously at Pace Academy, of these offensive linemen coming out of Pace are so well coached and so ready to play. I mean, I don't put anything past Kirby. I think all of this is orchestrated and planned, as it probably should be. And I think that was a direct message to Sawyer, who's probably, a heavy Georgia lean anyway, but having your future college coach compliment your current high school coaching staff in a press conference probably doesn't hurt matters. Travis Kelly talking about the number 8. That's the number of players that Fields is thought to be bringing with him to Georgia. That's what I keep hearing, absolutely. Hal Baxley also weighing in on Amelia Island. He says it's 65% Georgia-owned. I've got 2 places. Well, there you go, Hal. First of all, congratulations to you, because that's a great place to have some real estate. Lee McKinnon checking in from Jacksonville, a dog lover down there. And, I know that Jacksonville Bulldog Club is big, and a lot of dog fans living there on what they call the First Coast. Eric Green says, I live in Florida. It's great not seeing any lizard flags. Nobody's flying them right now. That's great to hear. Ken Feinberg asked a really good recruiting question. Does Josh Vann flip now that Fields is in the fold? And that's actually something I don't know the answer to, because I know at one point in time that there was thought to be this really strong connection between Vann and Fields. But you get the impression a lot of people sort of knew about Fields before he actually committed. Was Vann one of those guys? Did Vann have the update on Fields and choose South Carolina anyway because he feels like South Carolina will prioritize him? Remember, one of the things we've heard about South Carolina and Josh Vann is they would give him a chance to be an outside receiver, a little bit more glamour position, where Georgia was only looking at Vann to be an inside slot guy, occupying a lot of the same role that Kearis Jackson is probably going to occupy. Is that kind of what's going on there? That's probably worth asking Jeff Sintel about on Friday. I had wondered that myself. I don't have the answer to that question. Does Vann reconsider Georgia now that Fields is here? I have a hunch, and this is just a hunch, this is just an opinion, that Vann had to know about Fields early and chose South Carolina anyway, that relationship may be severed based on Vann thinking he had more of a playing chance at South Carolina. But I know that Tucker's been good to Georgia before. I know that Vann's film looks really good. I think he's a pretty interesting athlete, and if he could get back interested in Georgia again, I think that's a player that Georgia ought to consider being interested in too. Wesley Abstinence has a really good line here. He says, I'm 30. Spurrier ruined my entire childhood. Couldn't have fun trick-or-treating. It is true. I'm a decade older than you, but that 90s, anytime around Halloween on the 90s was ruined by Steve Spurrier. There's no question about that. You got to give him credit for it. And look forward to creating a new era in that Georgia-Florida rivalry. It's one of the reasons why we do the Gator Hater Countdown every day. Monty Moon says, I want James Cook. I think you'll probably get Cook eventually. I think he was a strong Georgia lean before. Mom raving about the official visit. I think it's a matter of when it comes to James Cook, and putting the number 1 running back with the nation's, number 3 running back for the class of 2018. That is quite a recruiting job being done there by Del McGee, who I guess, did I see this correct? He moved up to number 2. Is it 24/7 Sports that ranks this? The individual recruiters, I guess McGee's now ranked number 2 on their list, and that seems like a pretty good spot for him to be. Ken Feinberg says, my Sawyer calling him a heavy Georgia lean was a good pun. I didn't mean it that way, but I guess it turned out that way. Jerry Lewis says, what will you want next when Georgia gets number 1 everything? Recruiting, ranking, championships, everything. Yeah. Listen, y'all know I'm very difficult to satisfy here. I have a chance to be greedy. I do look ahead to 2019 when Georgia may have on the field at one time the nation's number 1 quarterback from the class of 2018, nation's number 1 wide receiver from the class of 2019, number 1 running back from the class of 2018. Yeah. I guess, that could be a lot of fun. And at that point in time, Georgia may be winning championships on the field and recruiting championships as well. That's true. James Bryant says, on the DawgNation website, will you list those possible flips you mentioned a couple of minutes ago? That's a good idea. I'm sure Jeff Sintel will be writing some about that. I'll let Jeff handle most of the recruiting writing, but I'm guessing you'll see those kinds of lists, James, from him coming a lot in the days ahead. Jeremy Walker said, could Georgia have the number 1 class in 2019? I think it's a possibility, right? I think that given where the ranking is now and what's left to come, I think that's definitely a possibility. Max McDonald says, any news on Adam Anderson? I guess the last I heard on Anderson is that the challenge coming from Alabama here is actually pretty real. I'm not telling you that in any way that Anderson's not going to end up at Georgia, but this thing with LSU was, I guess, maybe never going to last. Anderson was never truly considering Tennessee, but Alabama for Adam Anderson may be a real challenger and a real battle here coming up. That's one of those names we'll be watching a lot. Sean Schooler with a restaurant recommendation in Jacksonville. I have not been to that place, but I always love a good restaurant recommendation, especially near the cocktail party. Philip Jordan Wells says, now I want some prime rib. Yeah. When y'all start talking restaurants on here, I start to get hungry too. Absolutely. Michael McCollum mentioning Nolan Smith, another reason why Georgia could have the number one class in 2019, and another one of those number one players at his position on the field potentially for the Dogs there that season. All right, we're late. We got to go. We'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. for us on DawgNation Daily Live. We'll also post the audio version of this show coming up in just a moment at DawgNation.com, so you can hear everything from the regular broadcast, and then 3 p.m. Eastern Time for AT&T SEC Country Live on the SEC Country Facebook page. So we'll see you there for that, and then back again tomorrow at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. Y'all have a great day.